I would like to once again remind you that we have interpretation, so please pick one of the languages that you would like to listen to today's presentation in. If you don't want to be seen in a video, please turn off your camera. And now let me start the recording of our next lecture. And now I would like to say that our next speaker is Dmytro Zaiets. He is the PhD in sociology. And it is a pleasure for me, as I have already mentioned, an honor, not simply because Dmytro today will be talking about a very relevant topic, but also because Dmytro himself serves in the armed forces of Ukraine. And on behalf of all our colleagues, we would like to express their gratitude to you, Dmytro, for your service, and say that we are incredibly fascinated. All of our community is very fascinated to have with you today, both our American friends and colleagues, and especially Ukrainian ones. And a huge thank you from me. And a few words about Mr. Zaiets. He defended a thesis on sociology in Kharkiv National University. The scope of his interests covers a good neighborhood, cultural requests, civic activism. Dmytro, if you would like to add anything to that, feel free to do so. But today, he will talk about a very relevant topic. Speaking Ukrainian as a career navigator in the armed forces. Over to you. Thank you. Hello, everybody. A pleasure to see all of you. And I'm sorry that I couldn't join you for the previous lecture. I have a very packed schedule, and so a lot of time is dedicated to training. I was sincerely impressed with your kind words. Well, I still haven't killed anyone. I'm only learning how to do that. So I'm not yet a real soldier belonging to the armed forces of Ukraine. I'm only going through the training. Yes, I am Dmytro Zaiets. I'm a soldier in the armed forces of Ukraine. And also I now am training to become the infantry officer. And as it was already mentioned, I will be talking about the Ukrainian language and knowing how to produce a proper discourse in Ukrainian language within the armed forces of Ukraine, because it is very important for the armed forces, because there are reforms happening in the armed forces of Ukraine, and it has been happening since 2014, but very slowly. And now the speed is way faster. We're trying to harmonize everything with the NATO standards. There is a lot of new equipment. You're aware of all of that. You're following the news. And we are trying to learn how to do everything with this new equipment. We're trying to take on the new standards. We are going through the training, and we are also helping foreign soldiers to train. They now come to also learn from us. But I would like to mention that even despite this huge desire and huge change in the army, there is still a lot of post-Soviet legacy. First, of course, is the armed equipment, almost all the weapon that is still there back from the Soviet days, the leftovers from the countries of the so-called Eastern Bloc, of the post-socialist countries. We continue then this equipment. There is a lot of such equipment. The majority of the equipment is that type of equipment. We are also sticking to the charters that and statutes that also contain a lot of the Soviet heritage, or oftentimes they were simply translated into Ukrainian with some amendments and changes, but still they bring a lot back from the Soviet days. The relationship within the army itself, the attitude towards the service is also somewhat similar to the Soviet one, even though, of course, in the Ukrainian army, there is no the subordinate versus superior relationship, but there are still lots of rudimentary things in the relationship between the soldiers who are at different levels of the hierarchy. There was a lot of authoritarian type thing, authoritarian approach, lots of rude things. I don't know how to express it in a different way, how to explain it in a better way. But an interesting thing is that from the viewpoint of language and communication, army probably is the most democratic place if we're speaking about Ukraine, because there are lots of different languages here, different variations of Surzhyk, different dialects. And it is not a problem. It is not a ground for conflict between the soldiers or soldiers and officers. And this astonished me. I will definitely mention it in my paper. And I will mention that this is the safest place for the language to flourish, to develop, and to obtain new forms. But on the other hand, there is terminology. And there is the military science. There are orders. There is communication between the officers and the troops. And that has to happen in Ukrainian, in a specific Ukrainian language. There is a specific military discourse. And once again, I'd like to emphasize that, well, language is probably the most powerful differentiator between Ukrainian army, present-day Ukrainian army, as opposed to the Ukrainian army 10 or 20 years ago. Language basically is, well, probably is the only or almost the only factor that differentiates Soviet or post-Soviet and Ukrainian army and Russian army, because there are lots of similar things between the Ukrainian and the Russian army. Because now probably we are the most powerful army in Europe, at least, at the very least. And basically this is a war between the equals. We are not behind them, but the language, yes, there are lots of similarities in the battle tactics, weapon, we all are using Kalashnikov. Yes, there is European equipment, European arms, but not that much. The Russian troops are also, over this half a year, they learned a lot about how the Ukrainian army fights. They learned a lot from us. So there's always a reaction and counter-reaction, and you're always trying to be ahead of your enemy. And our enemy is a very powerful one. We should not underestimate our opponent. And yeah, we have to treat them with respect, the same as they have to treat us with respect. So the Ukrainian language in this system also is almost an only thing that differentiates our armies. And many soldiers have trouble with it, because it's very hard to learn this military discourse, especially for people who come from the Russian language regions, and there are quite a few people like that, because most people come from southern and eastern areas. And my objective was to look at what language matters in the walkie-talkie, in your radio, and I wanted to see the connection between the knowledge of Ukrainian and knowledge of this military discourse in Ukrainian and the navigation of the soldier in the armed forces of Ukraine, their career navigation, and how Ukrainian language serves as the signal of the systemic change of decommunization, moving on to the NATO standards, onto the more modern standards. Regarding the assumptions, it's very simple. I assume, and I see it with my brother in arms, the officers who have good command of Ukrainian can produce good military discourse are perceived as well-educated, patriotic, and their status is higher. So they are perceived as more high level, even though they can be lieutenants, but yeah, they seen as better educated, and good command of Ukrainian makes them seem that they're people of a higher rank. But when person makes lots of mistakes during the conversational lectures, makes lots of mistakes in Ukrainian, or speaks using суржик, a mixture of Ukrainian/Polish or Ukrainian/Russian, it is always perceived as a mistake, as something wrong, as something that's not true, you know, as if it's not true, as if it is not a real officer standing in front of us and speaking. So many people, good quality Ukrainian language is a symbol of education. Any person, be it an officer or a soldier. And I want to double check it. Therefore, I came up with the methodology for testing it out to find out how soldiers perceive certain phrases, certain sentences from the discourse of officers, our lecturers, our instructors, senior officers, how they treat them. Do they understand them well? How do they interpret that? And whether they can produce good quality discourse. From the methodological viewpoint, I have already started touching upon that. There are two tasks that I thought that I will carry them out in two stages. First, I will ask my brothers in arms to assess and to describe some phrases by our senior officers and instructors to give them a certain score, and then at the second stage to also talk to other brothers in arms to evaluate the quality of their Ukrainian language, or not Ukrainian, maybe other language that they don't speak Ukrainian, so that they can evaluate each other, a peer review. And given that I have this opportunity to also observe and to communicate a lot with officers and brothers in arms, of course, I'm observing them. And I want to interview them about how Ukrainian language, does it help? Or maybe the other way around. Maybe it does not allow you to become a proper officer. Because again, I'd like to repeat it once again, that I am working at this officer track, and everything that I'm talking about has to do exclusively with the mobilized people who were offered to become officers because we have higher education and to later join the army. The sample is the cadets of the officer course. These are representatives from different regions. We have two samples. One, representatives of the South, basically people who were drafted from Kharkiv, Luhansk, and Donetsk Oblast, and Zaporizhzhia Oblast, if I'm not mistaken. And the second sample covers the entire of Ukraine, because now I'm in Lviv Oblast, and here we have people from different groups. So here I have an incredible opportunity to carry out these tasks, and of course to talk and interview the officers as well as soldiers.
Я проходжу деякі етапи на цьому шляху до офіцерів. І, звичайно,
on this way, I'm doing this work stage by stage. I'm trying to observe how is the language changing among my brothers in arms, as it happened in Dnipropetrovsk region or closer to the eastern regions where we were speaking exclusively Russian, but now we are trying to switch to Ukrainian, and what actually triggers people to switch to Ukrainian? What facilitates this process? And what impedes the process of switching to Ukrainian? And the next stage will be this stage will be in winter, and the language in walkie-talkie. And this is an open question because it depends on the instructors, as some believe that it's better to speak Ukrainian when you are in the trenches or when you are in the attack, in the offensive. But some people say that Russian helps because it distracts the enemy, and it helps to disguise the fact that we are from Ukraine. So this question is an open question, and I am looking forward to an opportunity to study it in greater detail. I forgot to mention a couple of elements of this military rhetoric that the soldiers are using. And how to adjust to this new reality and how to adopt this new identity. As we are all civilians, we do not have any experience of combat, and we didn't even have any military training at the university. We were just invited as people with high education who could become the officers right away, and to be in charge of the command of the units right away. This is the statement of a winner and of the victor. And you see that this is the statement which all of us are supposed to read out loud in the evening. Therefore, we need to speak Ukrainian, and we need to speak military language. You see that it's a bit worn because I'm using it all the time. And we have the pauses over here. So we also have the papers on the orders, military orders, and also the lectures, the notes from the lectures. And we also use the chevrons, the military insignia, the knives, all of that reminds us of Ukraine. And, you know, I would like to look into this objects as used as the part of this new role that is assumed by people in the environment where they are right now, rather harsh environment, I would say. And I also wanted to show you the trial version of some of the statements that I selected to be tried out among the soldiers, among our recruits. I don't know, maybe Sarah could help me out with this one. I sent a document in Telegram. Would you share this document, please?
Sure, Dima, let me do that real quick. 1 second.
Показати цю таблицю з фразами.
I just wanted to show you this table with the statements. They are more of a folk nature, and they are not the minutes from any lecture. This is not the military order, but this is the usual story for military discourse. And this is the way we communicate. The senior officers are using some obscenities, and we are using some jokes that date back to the Soviet times. Do you mind showing a second or even the third page with the table?
Ага, так. Ось вони.
Yes, thank you.
Там їх 10 зараз, так.
Well, you see this 10 phrases. So I wanted our officer cadets to be able to explain this phrases that could be interpreted in different way. And these are the phrases that were uttered by some of the instructors or senior officers who crossed our paths, or who were giving us orders, or were lecturing us, or instructing us. So you see that some of these phrases are in Ukrainian, some of these phrases are in Russian, and some of them are in Surzik, Ukrainian and Russian languages. And you see that there are fewer Ukrainian phrases rather than mixed Ukrainian and Russian. And we have a lot of this mixture of Ukrainian and Russian in the army, as this is the place where East meets West. We also have the mix with the Polish language. Well, this is it from my side for now, and I would like to hear your feedback. As you see that now I am still collecting the ideas for the design of this study, so I would really appreciate your comments, your feedback, and maybe some tips. How could I make this study more accurate and more interesting? Maybe I should add something, or maybe it is worthwhile removing some parts. Maybe it would make more sense to focus on some parts of the research and omit the others. Thank you very much, Dmytro, for your very interesting presentation of this study we are looking forward to. And dear colleagues, please, you could take the floor now. Maria, please go ahead. Thank you. Regarding what you have just mentioned, my American colleagues recently told me that linguists are using this notion of new natives, new native speakers, meaning those people who are switching to Ukrainian under the conditions of war. So maybe this information would be of use to you. Maybe you could use it in your study, this notion, this term. And I am the specialist in ethics. This is my professional background. So in your presentation, I was focusing not on the essence, but on some of the part that you mentioned. You said that there is the line of authority between senior and lower rank soldiers and officers, but are you sure that there is no bullying? Don't you think that this bullying or hazing are the important components of the induction of someone's service in the army, or as the entrance exam for some institution? Thank you. Well, why I don't call it the humiliation of juniors. This is because I call it this disciplinary practices, and I call it the disciplinary practices because they are substantiated. For instance, if we are talking about physical training, we are doing physical training that is very exhausting, but is still very useful. I do understand that if there is some mistake made, and I do understand that this is the mistake that is highly related to my performance on the battlefield, that is directly connected to my performance as the professional military, and I have to be penalized for that. I do this physical exercises. I do not perceive it as bullying, as with your hands and with your legs, you as if are able to master it better. But this humiliating treatment of juniors, to me, this is about something senseless. For instance, sweeping the floors or sweeping the yard 10 times a day, or why, or cleaning the trees, doing something that makes no sense. And I do not see this over here. And you know, we have different age groups over here. Someone who is age 25 could be an officer, senior officer of the unit with 50-year-old privates. And obscenities, yes, they are used. And I was fighting with our unit chief for the penalty, which seemed to me irrational. And I said that I would file a claim in your name for this kind of treatment. And at the end, he apologized in front of the whole unit. So this is this new army, and this is striking. But the penalty for bad Ukrainian language, well, we didn't see that for this point of time. So everyone is trying to be very understanding with regards to the attempts to speak Ukrainian, and everyone in our military academy is trying to speak Ukrainian, as it helps to increase your authority among your brothers in arms. And we are told that you need to learn this terminology, and you need to learn to speak military Ukrainian. The short phrases, the signals, these commands, they have to be in Ukrainian. For instance, these abbreviations that you've seen on the screen. And some words that I use as the disguise that means something else completely. Well, this is the secret language that we are using. Thank you for your comment, and thank you for this reference. Maybe you could send me the reference to this publication that you mentioned, because yes, we are becoming new natives.
Саро, будь ласка, тоді
Thank you so
Олександр.
much, Sarah. Go ahead, then Alexandra, and then Andrei. Go ahead.
Dmytro, thank you for this really wonderful presentation. I have so many questions, but I'll limit myself to two. The first one is, you mentioned that many of your fellow brothers in arms are trying to improve their Ukrainian. I wonder what tools they're using. Is it just being in an immersive environment, or are there specific, tools that they're learning to try to improve their Ukrainian? My second question was about a phrase you used. I think it was something like high quality military discourse, or good military discourse. And I wondered if you could describe what are the components of good military discourse? How's it differentiated from other forms? Thank you so much.
Дмитре, ми вас не чуємо, вибачте.
Dmytro, we cannot hear you. Excuse me. my brothers came, so it was pretty nosy. Well, the military discourse. It's very important for these words, for everything to be very concise, very brief, and for specific words to be used, that can be interpreted only one way. In the military discourse, there cannot be some ambiguity, some words that can be interpreted in different ways. Everybody should speak in the same way, to put it shortly. The more precise, the more concise, the shorter it is. The more homogeneous the phrase is. I don't know how to explain it, how to put it. There are some idioms, some forms in Ukrainian language, some new words that are emerging, and they should be used. Of course, it is very difficult, especially for those people who do not speak Ukrainian or who speak Surgic. I think it's even harder for them, or people who come from Russian-speaking regions. These people actually speak very good literary Ukrainian because they went to Ukrainian schools. Because I was told that I speak like a TV host, and it was mentioned by people from Vinnytsia Oblast or from Volyn, where people mostly speak Ukrainian. Yeah. And the first question, what was the first question about the quality or what?
About
I meant
tools for language learning, specific tools. Or is it just immersion?
Ось ця промова переможця.
Well, yes, that's the speech of a winner. Some forms that do not even require words. Every day, a moment of silence. When at 9 a.m., every soldier has to stand in a specific position, and everybody remembers all of their brothers in arms who passed away. And I think that it is also a powerful tool or mechanism, I don't know, something that we're all holding on to. And this is a very powerful thing that turns us into officers. Well, I don't know how to put it into words, even though there is not even a single word is being said, but everybody thinks about it that, yeah, somebody might also remember me this way if I happen to die. Or, well, I don't know what else. Yeah, well, probably this is it for this question. Thank you. Alexandra, go ahead. Thank you. Dmytro, a huge thank you for your presentation and for your service too. And yes, this topic is something that is very dear to me. What is your take on what could be the main barriers for our army to switch to the NATO standards? And am I getting it correct? Say, there is the new hierarchy of relationship where, for example, in the Soviet army, we saw that the top leadership made a decision and then it was going from the top to the bottom. But NATO standards also say that there is this in-between level, the sergeants, etc. But we are very short on them. And oh, I can tell that someone is also talking to Dmytro now. And this new hierarchy of the formal and informal relationship, communication at the level of a sergeant. I hope I managed to convey my question. So basically, main barriers, informal and informal communication when switching to the NATO standards. Thank you so much for this question. As you have mentioned, in the Ukrainian army now, we do have a very powerful sergeant movement. This is a very important group of people in the battle because sergeants oftentimes take up the commandership position, but this is a problem. This is simply because we have a shortage of lieutenants juniors. Sadly, they are killed, and there is a war that is very high on artillery. So many people pass away. So yeah, it's hard to talk about that because I will also be in that position. But this is the reality that we currently are in. And yes, the formative relationship is changing. The army becomes more democratic, and I'm surprised because I feel that I'm better protected from some silly things, from some authoritarian forms, from some homogeneity. Even in the civilian life, I sometimes was scared of saying or writing something in Russian. I can use it to communicate freely. But of course, the official language is the Ukrainian language. We exclusively use Ukrainian when talking to the officers, and we're all trying to do our best. Well, speaking about the barriers, well, here we're probably talking more about the supplies, because when you have Kalashnikov and you're using some equipment dated 1999, and you look at this terrible old Soviet equipment, and this is what we're still using. That is very hard to believe that it is 2023 and we are still using this equipment to fight the producer of this equipment, and that we also participated in producing and manufacturing all of that. And the young officers who teach us with the laptops, etc. We are basically breaking away from the Soviet heritage, and you see the light at the end of the tunnel. When you see these people with the prosthetics and okay, I get you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your response. Thank you so much. Andriy, go ahead. Good evening. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. Thank you. I'll be very quick. I'd like to say that I was mobilized in February 2022. Back then, everybody first would become a soldier. There were no different tracks, and I'm looking at it from a different perspective, from the bottom. And yes, there are many things, they'll depend on the unit, but regarding the research, there are a few things. First, are we restricting it with the armed forces of Ukraine or with the defense forces of Ukraine in general? Because we have the National Guard, we have the special communications, lots of units that do not fall within the structure of the armed forces of Ukraine. So are we discarding them, saying that we are not gonna include them, or will we also include them and ask them and compare? So it is about the scope. And the second thing is regarding the language. Again, based on my experience, well, of course, there are different soldiers, different records, but in our case, the majority of the officers are Russian speakers, and Ukrainian speakers are basically working on different positions. So that a coincidence, again, this is the question, are they forced to do that? Because obviously some people should be Ukrainian language speakers. And again, there is also the question about the quality of their language. Are we talking about the Ukrainian language that is used in everyday life, or are we talking about the literary standards from the early 90s, when we simply substituted Lenin as our everything with Shevchenko as our everything? So are there still some rituals that stay after the 90s, or are we moving on to something new? And again, when we're speaking about the language, there is yet another issue about the documents and paperwork. Because let's look at the male last names in Ukrainian. Do we have to conjugate them or not? In different documents, again, in the army, we can write sentences in accordance with the official rules. For example, Mr. Pozunko, Mr. Pozunka, when we're conjugating it. But in some documents, we have to mention them without conjugating them in the nominative case. Yes, and it might look weird, but the rules say that this is how we are supposed to do that, because I think that we also are slightly limping on this norm. So what do we consider to be the correct language? But in general, of course, there's also the question of surjik among the soldiers, the issue of whether officers are supposed to know Ukrainian. Of course, this should be studied, and I can only wish you all the best luck in this endeavor. Thank you so much. Well, this was a pretty provocative for me as well, to show that the language issue is more complex than we are used to think, because 50% of the army speaks Russian, especially if we're talking about the eastern part, because we had all the officers at the basic course all speak Russian, and nobody ever raised the question of who uses which language. Of course, all of the orders were in Ukrainian, this language that you have mentioned from the early 90s that we inherited from the Soviet days, you know, the one that everyone hates, and nobody likes it, but you know, for example, still it was used. And it's like as if it is restricting you. Now, talking about the paperwork, yes, I understand what you were talking about, because we do not have such standards. Everything is not that unambiguous. It's not clear what to rely on. And I would like to also mention that, and we do not yet even know what to say about Ukraine, because when everyone around us speaks Surjik, or even worse, Russian, then what do we consider to be Ukrainian language? What kind of standard should we stick to? So I do agree with you, and this is what I wanted to mention too. But probably, yes, I will only cover the armed forces of Ukraine, because physically, you know, on this track, I am in touch with some people, and I can access certain units or training centers, and that is why I want to do a research on this level. So most likely I will only cover the armed forces of Ukraine. But yeah, I would like to somehow restrict myself, set some limits, because I do not have enough time to carry out this research, because I'm also going through the training currently. There is very little time. But yes, thank you so much for bringing it up, and thank you for your good wishes. Yeah, I'll try to take notes and carry out my interviews.
Дуже добре. Оксано, будь ласка.
All right, thank you very much. Oksana, please go ahead. Thank you. Greetings, everyone. I am a representative of the fellows from last year. Your presentation was very interesting, but Dmytro, as far as I understand, you are the Russian speaker, and for you it's either Russian or Ukrainian or Surjik, mixed Ukrainian and Russian. You are not mentioning dialect at all. So what you're telling, you are mentioning as Lviv Polish mix, that is actually a dialect, because if you would refer everything to Surjik, that would be not very accurate. Well, yes, indeed. Thank you very much for your comment. There might be this very substantial mistake made. And, you know, this is like Switzerland, where you have in all the cantons the dialects that are taught as the official languages. And yes, and we have this standard Ukrainian, we have the literary Ukrainian that is used in some recommendations and official communication. But in daily communication, the story is different. And, you know, we cannot say that in the armed forces there are some units that are compiled only of Kiev citizens or some region representatives. Are there any military units that formed based on their region of origin? I am not a military myself, and I'm not an expert. So maybe the way they speak actually is a part of their region denomination. This is not the surjik. This is just the denomination to their region, because that is a mistake in your study, because it is not that black and white to Russian, Ukrainian, and surjik. You need to learn the dialect studies in order to differentiate.
Це дуже важливо, звичайно. Так,
Thank you. Thank you very much for your comment. That's very important.
Так, пані Оксана, так, допоможете
так.
знайти з
Oksana, would you help Dmytro to differentiate? Yes, yes. I actually sent you a message in Telegram chat. So if you need any help in your study, please send me the sentences or some words that you are referring to Surjik group. And do not make this mistake, because very often people believe that Surjik is just everything that deviates from literal Ukrainian, standard Ukrainian, but that is not always the case. Daniel, please, over to you.
Hello, Dmytro and everyone else. First of all, thank you for that presentation. Your area of research is very interesting, particularly interesting to me. I also want to mention I'm a major in the U.S. Army, and I want to say first and foremost that I have tremendous respect for everything that the Ukrainian Army is doing and that they've been able to accomplish. So I wanted to open with that. I also have a question for you, and it relates to my area of interest. Unfortunately, traditionally the U.S. Army has focused predominantly on the study of Russian. And I'm curious what your impression is when members of the Ukrainian Army are interacting with Western militaries, particularly the U.S. military, and U.S. service members are using Russian as a medium for communication. What are the implications? How is that received? What is the impression left with members of the Ukrainian military? And unfortunately, we have a limited number of Ukrainian speakers in the Army. And in fact, many of our speakers that are in the U.S. Army that speak Russian, that are being utilized as interpreters, in a lot of cases are ethnic Russians or heritage speakers. And I'm just curious what kind of challenges that presents, for that relationship.
Питання зрозуміло, але, на жаль, я просто не маю...
I do understand your question, but unfortunately, I do not have any relevant information to give you the response.
Не стикався з цим таких
I never came across such cases. I haven't heard about such conflicts, and I cannot give you an answer to that. I'm sorry. But it seems to me that probably there are no conflicts. I think that it is not the right timing. But this is just my impression, because we need to check whether it is true or not.
Дякую дуже. Дмитро, чи
Thank you
можете
very
ви
much,
надіслати,
Dmytro.
можливо, якісь відео подивитися?
Maybe you could suggest some videos to Daniel about the language situation in the Ukrainian army. Well, I need to look into it, and I need time to do that kind of research. Maybe you have heard about any studies on the language situation within armed forces of Ukraine, or maybe other colleagues are aware of such studies.
Багато читаю журналістських якихось текстів, але ось так, щоб
I'm reading a lot of journalist
Багато пишуть про
publications,
те, як
but
люди
I have
переводять
not
мову
come across
як
the
на
researchers
фронті,
yet.
так.
Many people
Звісно,
switch to
із
Ukrainian language on the front line,
вони починають розмовляти українською. Я
even
чому
if
це-
they
чому це
come
можливо?
from
Так, тому
eastern
такі вони ці тексти
or
носять
southern
такий
regions.
ідеологічний якийсь характер.
And this is more of an ideological nature.
Добре, дякую. Ще, колеги, питання?
All right, thank you. Any other questions?
Дякую, Ден, за питання. Дякую, пане
Thank you,
Дмитре.
Dan, for your
Ну, я
question.
знаю, я б
Thank
теж
you,
хотіла
Dmytro.
долучитися до нашого
Well, if you don't mind, I
обговорення.
would like to jump in
Нещодавно
myself.
звернулися із
Recently, I got back from the military academy, and there was a conference held at West Point. Daniel was there at West Point. He is well aware of the work of the Department of Foreign Languages. And it was a very interesting conference that was called Language, Culture, and Army. And my colleagues who were speaking on that conference, and our colleagues who are teaching at West Point were mentioning the importance of the language for the army. And there was this motive on the conference. The the worst hurts where language is incapable to make the difference. And this idea was mentioned multiple times at that conference. I made a presentation on our study that we conducted jointly with Larissa Tesluk. Maybe you've heard about that, the influence of the war on the language. So I shared this study. And the language, the importance of the language in our modern society, the language is of this highest importance. And Dmytro, you are contributing a lot with your study. And I do believe that if you do not simply carry out the study, but also make a publication, if you describe the methodology behind the study, if you share the results of it, that would be highly valuable. And I would like to encourage you to do that. Please come up with a publication, as it is highly relevant and very timely. Alexandra? I just wanted to say to Dmytro, if you need any information about the border guard, uh, my husband serves in the border guard regiment, and he is from Venezuela, and he is talking to his brothers at arms in Ukrainian, and they are trying to teach the brothers in arms the Ukrainian language. So if you need the comparison with some other parts of the defense forces of Ukraine, not only the armed forces, at least I could provide you with that information.
Супер, дякую.
Thank you very much.
Ще, шановні колеги, які коментарі,
Dear
поради,
colleagues, any
запитання,
comments, any notes,
дослідження
any ideas,
ситуації мовної взагалі?
any observations with regard to the language situation in
Я
general?
вашу думку. Я, власне, вже сформувала вашу думку.
Dmytro, I would like to hear about your opinion on the language situation in the army.
Я не так давно бачила відео Володимира
Recently,
Ращука. І Володимир
I
Ращук,
watched the
ви
video
можливо,
by
знаєте,
Volodymyr
актор,
Rashuk. I don't know if you know him. He is an actor at Lisa Ukrainka
І
Theater.
сам він з
He
Маріуполя,
is
російськомовний, але
serving
він
now. He is from
перейшов
Mariupol. He is a Russian
на
speaker,
українську мову,
but he
розмовляє
switched
зараз
to the
українською.
Ukrainian
Можливо,
language and he speaks Ukrainian now. And in one of his videos,
українці повинні
he said that
українізувати, тому
Ukrainians
що
have to
російськомовний
Ukrainize
українець – це одні
because Russian-speaking Ukrainians equal to the missiles that are flying over the territory of Ukraine and that are killing Ukrainian citizens.
зауваження, я би сказала.
And that
І в той
statement
час,
is
що ви думаєте з цього приводу?
vivid one. And what is your opinion about that?
Чи навіть не стільки, як ви вважаєте, чи оце
Dmytro,
питання
do you think that
порушувати в армії зараз?
this issue should be brought up in the army? Well, I would object to that. I agree with the opinion of my senior. who enjoys a lot of authority, and he is using the language as the practical tool. It doesn't matter which language you use while giving your commands. It is important to be understood. If it helps you to carry out your military tasks, it's good enough. And I think that we need to be calm, and we need to be rational about the language we are using. We need to remember that it is a tool of communication, and standards, deviation of standards, well, that is important. But as a sociologist, I need to stand for diversity, and every word that I hear that someone has to do something and speak exclusively specific language, because otherwise you would be punished if you do not obey. For instance, you will be killed by a missile, or something else would happen to you. It is unacceptable to be. But the Ukrainian language, yes, has to develop. It has to become the primary language in the Ukrainian army. But I'm not talking about some standardized Ukrainian. It cannot be this official language that is dry and not very sensitive. But people might use different dialects. Russian, well, okay. If some of my brothers in arms decide that they would like to speak Russian, well, that is their choice. And of course, we could encourage them to speak Ukrainian, but penalties, no, we don't, we have enough penalties and violence at different stages. We have a lot of aggression, so we should stop it. We should prevent it. We need to construct, we need to build, we need to extend rather than destroy or ruin. This is what Russian army is doing. Thank you very much. And Oksana, please go ahead. Just a quick remark. I remember that the Russian language teachers had some bonuses, and that was used as an incentive for other teachers to switch to teaching the Russian language. Those who want to have their career in the military, they switch to Ukrainian. So maybe you need to incentivize them, and they would switch to Ukrainian. It could be either monetary incentives or some other incentives. Well, we do have various incentives in the army. For instance, those could be bonuses, but you could also get some appraisals. But I do agree with our colleague who was speaking about the political officers and the way they communicate. They're supposed to speak about the ideology, and they are supposed to be in charge of the psychological atmosphere in the army. But of course, they are part of the propaganda, and the way they communicate very much resembles the Soviet ways of communication. So we do need some political officers who would be working better. Probably they should watch Ukrainian movies, and there will be more of those Ukrainian movies. Well, there are some. For instance, Мої думки тихі or Keyboards. In Indiana, we're showing this film. We had a wonderful discussion today. We've heard wonderful presentations today, and it was a great pleasure to talk to our co-thinkers today. I would like to thank our speakers for sharing their ideas, for sharing their topics for the studies. I would like to thank Dmytro for doing the service, and we are very grateful. I would like to underscore that once again. We would like to thank our interpreters who have been with us for fifth workshop in a row. And we would like to thank you, dear colleagues, for joining us today and for becoming part of this event, for sharing your ideas, for sharing your comments, and for sharing your tips and guidance. Thank you. And I would like to remind you that our next meeting will take place on Thursday, and we will hear wonderful presentations. And let me remind you that we will be listening to Sergei Pakhomenko, who will tell us about the way the history is used in the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And we will hear from Irina Dukova. She will tell us about Ukrainian art music in the time of Russian full-scale invasion. Join us for this event. Thank you and have a great day. Glory to Ukraine and glory to the Ukrainian army. Glory to heroes. Goodbye. Thank you.